During this podcast, you will learn how an inner city kid from Boston ended up a journalist in the military and how that passion for writing snowballed into co creating a graphic novel with actress Rosario Dawson, which ended up landing him a manager for his writing career. This, in an unexpected twist, got him a pretty sweet gig as a junior executive in the story department at Fox for all their major films. During that tenure, David would spec a scripted pilot based on this graphic novel nights and weekends and end up optioning it to Brett Ratner's Rat Pack production company on the Warner Brothers studio lot. After that, he ended up in some of the most prized pitch rooms in all town. Wow, that was a mouthful. What's up, David Atchison? How are you?
Hey man, what's up? Gosh, man, I need to have you with me at all times because you make me sound way more boss than I feel I am. I mean, it's all true, but yeah, man, thank you. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, no worries. You know, you grew up in Boston with a working family. Just let us know what was your favorite film that made you fall in love with the medium to begin with?
Let's see. My favorite film as a kid was
Yeah.
actually a movie called Darrow, Data Analyzing Robot Youth Life Form, and it was about a kid. It was like all things that I still love today, but it was about a kid who was a flesh and blood individual, but he had a computer brain. And he gets adopted by this family, and it's about him attempting to live with his family and the government looking for him, the scientists who built him coming to find him. It was really action-packed for the time. It was something I saw when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and that probably really started my fascination with writing. I was a big comic book fan growing up, and I had an uncle who was into that, and I liked science fiction. So I read a lot as a kid. But I would say Darrow, for the most part, for me, really bridged the gap between the books and things that I was reading in movies, because in some ways, Darrow could have just been, I guess, what nowadays would be considered a YA novel, but it could have easily have been a YA novel in its time. And so for me as a child, I was like, I want to do this. If I can make these things, I'd love to do that.
That's pretty cool. I mean, my favorite.
That was probably where it started for me.
Well, that's to me, it sounds like a very highbrow film for being only 6 years old. My first love was Batman the original with Jack Nicholson, Michael Keaton,
Yeah.
and it was a simplistic plot, and I really liked how dark Batman was for some reason. Maybe it was a past life. I don't know why I was attracted to that character, but he was so cool to me. So, what comic books were you into?
As a kid, the Fantastic Four from Marvel Comics was a really big one for me, which is about a family. They're a family of astronauts, and that was a really cool thing for me. Spider-Man, I think every child loves Spider-Man.
I love Spider-Man.
And his neighborhood reminded me a lot of my neighborhood in Boston. And so Spider-Man was a big one. I say this one, actually, this character is now a little more popular than he was when I was young, because he's on a show called DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Firestorm, the Nuclear Man. I don't think the character was particularly that cool, but I had just learned about nuclear power as a kid. So to see nuclear in the title and read that he was a nuclear man was just very evocative and interesting for me. So he was another one I liked. I was a kid, I read everything. So, somebody put something in my hand, I read it. And as that related back to the film things, as a child, I really liked the first episode of shows, because the first episode typically would tell you why the show existed, why these things were happening. And so I was a big fan as a child of finding first episodes and last episodes of shows. And when something new started up, I would watch it. And I was a big fan of, as a kid, of looking at the TV guide. I would read the TV guide religiously just to read the premises of the movies and television shows. Sometimes I wouldn't even watch them. I just wanted to read them and know what they were about.
Now, did you go to the military or did you go to college first?
I went to college. I started off at a regular school, State University of West Georgia, out here in Georgia at the time, because my parents were here. So I moved down here with them eventually, and I went to school out here, and I did about 2.5 years in school, and it was just kind of boring me. I was doing okay, but I was bored, and my dad had been in the Air Force, and I knew after school I had to go do something, and I eventually wanted to get my degree. And so I joined the Air Force, and I joined the Air Force Reserve.
Got it. And did you advance any part of your love for film while you were in college before the Air Force, or was it just wasted time?
Well, it wasn't necessarily a waste of time because I learned a lot about writing there. I took, creative writing classes and things there. And I also got into anthropology, which was a big thing for me. I would say, if anything, what helped me in school, more so than directly having a film class, which in retrospect I would have loved, what really helped me is that I was learning a lot of the things that I could then piece and grab and put in the film. So I was taking a lot of science classes, history classes, sociology, anthropology, and those classes were teaching me the things that would help to shape my view and to shape the things that I enjoy writing about and I'm attracted to. So like, one of the things that I like doing is I'm a big fan of saying, well, if I'm going to do something in the fiction space, what can I add from the real world? What elements of the real world can I add to make it more relevant and interesting to audiences? And that is something that I learned in college because, I was into all these far out things nobody really cared about, comics and things like that. But then I would go to class and I was learning about these real world things, and I was kind of in my own head putting it all together and saying, man, this is interesting, this is fun, this is cool. So for me, I learned a lot about learning, to be honest, in college, and I learned a lot about what mattered to other people, which I believe really helps out a lot because when you learn what matters to other people, then you learn what they want to see in writing, and it helps you to come up with relevant topics.
And when you went into the Air Force, just tell me about that world for you. I suspect the last thing you were thinking about was being an aspiring writer in the film and television business.
I'll tell you that, yeah, at that point, it was still kind of a dream for me. It wasn't anything I was necessarily expecting to do. For me, I had been in school. When I was in college, I worked at a construction place at the same time. That's how I was paying to go to school. We're paying I had a scholarship, but, paying to be able to eat, be able to drive my car and all that stuff. And I worked at a construction place. In the summer times, I worked as a roller coaster operator. And so I was tired of working so hard. And so for me, the Air Force was a way that I could earn money to go to school. I could get some experience doing things. And I knew that I wanted to write. And at the time, I think I wanted to write for newspapers and perhaps comic books. Those are the two big things. Film just seemed so far outside of my scope at that point. And so I joined the military and I got to become a writer. I took the tests that they had there and I scored really high. They told me I could have any job that I wanted. And I told them I wanted to be a writer. And that was disappointing for them because they wanted me to tap on bombs or something. They wanted something that would be, it would be useful for the military. And I really wanted to be a writer. And so I got to write in the military and I got assigned to a couple of newspapers. And so I really got to kind of hone my voice. And also it was really good for me because I got to really recognize, it was about audience recognition. Who are these people on the base? What are they interested in hearing? And it was a matter of finding something that they wanted to hear and something that was interesting for me as an individual. I'm a liberal. And not many individuals in the military were liberals, to be honest. And so it was a thing where I had to find that happy place between what I valued and what individuals in the military valued. And what I realized was that a lot of the things that I valued as far as family, safety, honor, reasons I had gone to the military were things that they also understood. If even from a different perspective, they did. So for me, it became a way for me to to communicate with people that weren't like me and to write stories that they liked, because I would, whenever I hear something, my big thing was no matter how boring or how uninteresting I thought the topic was, I had to find a way to make that interesting and I had to find a way to make that story compelling. And those are things as a writer you need. And I learned a lot of that in the military because literally every day somebody was coming to me and going, hey, this guy just got an award because he takes this small piece of an engine out every single day. Can you do a story about it? And then I'd look at that and I would think to myself, this individual's waking up every day. Maybe he doesn't want to do this. Maybe he's got problems going on at home. How does he focus on his job when he has all these other things going on in his life? And that's something everybody can relate to because everybody does that. Everybody's got your life and then you have your job and you try to balance those two. So I would focus on things like that and add that information about the story as well. And that is a big thing that the military taught me. The other thing the military gave me a lot of times when I would go on TDY, which is when you would go places, you would kind of go like, places with the military, is it really helped me. I got into film because I kind of became a cinephile. I would go places, the basis, you could rent the movies for free. A lot of times if I didn't want to go out, I would rent a couple of films and go sit down and watch them. And since the basis selection of films wasn't necessarily the greatest, I would watch films that I normally wouldn't watch because it wasn't necessarily my preference. I just would watch whatever they had. And I found a lot of films that I wasn't necessarily as interested in, as a kid, something that I would have picked out for myself. So I found a lot of really cool stuff. And I got to go to other countries and see other countries' film markets. So I traveled to China, I traveled to Japan, and I traveled to India. I traveled to these places.
What did you learn? What did you learn? What did you learn from observing these film markets?
Well, for one, I got to see the quality of the films, and I got to see the people that were involved with the films. I got to see how well American films did in foreign markets, what the ratio between American films, which for them were foreign, and films from their own country. I got to see things that they were interested in, things that were cool to them, that I could then add to my own stories that I thought might be interesting in America, if that makes sense, And I also got to see things shoot. One of the biggest ones for me, and it's corny, but man, I loved it. There's a show in Japan called The Kamen Rider, it's been running now probably about, Kamen Rider it's over 40 years old now. It's probably going on 50. And it's a show, it's kind of like a kid's action show. And I was in Japan, and I happened upon them filming the show one morning on a run. And so I stopped, and I'm watching them film a fight scene for the show. And they saw me in the distance, and they sent somebody over to talk to me. And I got to come and interact with the cast when they were done shooting and talk to people there in their broken English and my broken Japanese. But I got to really see what filming was like in another place, and that really helped me out as well because it let me know wow, everybody around here does this. And for me, I think that was a big one because I saw a really young guy on the set and I was like, that guy's like my age. I could do this. And for me, that was the first time it really hit me because the internet is a beautiful thing, I think, for kids now because they can engage with things that aren't in close proximity to them. You could be in Iowa and you could learn to a degree about film because you can look up videos about it. And that wasn't something I necessarily had in college. I went to college in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so the internet was there, but it wasn't this thing that is so pervasive in our lives now, and it was really cool for me to go there and be able to meet people. So after that, whenever we would go someplace, I was looking for film connections, I was looking at studios to see what studios look like in other countries. If somebody shot and they left equipment someplace, even if I never watched the movie, I'd want to go and check it out. So I kind of became a cinephile in that way, being there. But it was almost like a construction site for me. I wanted to go and just see the equipment and things people were working with.
So give me an idea of what you exiting the Air Force and moving to Los Angeles looked like, and how long did that take, and who did you know before you moved out here?
Wow, man. Okay, I'm going to run through it. I'm going to do it quickly, but a lot was going on at the time. So initially, this is I got out of the military around the time of Hurricane Katrina. And so my last big, what they would call a sortie or a mission in the Air Force, was working to help move Katrinians from Louisiana to Georgia to a base there, process those individuals in, and then we had created, I guess you could say, the equivalent of almost like a store where you didn't have to pay for anything from donations that people had given us. And I had to help run the store in order to help people who were from Katrina who didn't have anything get stuff. And I can just tell you, man, that was just, it was draining in a way that I had never really recognized before, because a lot of those people, when they would come, they actually had individuals they were supposed to speak to. There were people there they were supposed to talk to, and if they had problems or something, we could work with them, but they had special individuals who were on site to be counselors. And I got to know a lot of the Katrinians because they would come to this little, this little store that we had set up for donations and things, and meet them. And there was one woman specifically that I met, and I would talk to her. She had a daughter my age. She would joke about introducing me to her daughter, and her husband left her. They had gotten their check from FEMA, and he left her. And, so immediately I told her, hey, we have individuals that you can talk to, here at the base. I'll introduce you to them. But these weren't people they interacted with, and she wanted to talk to me. And so I went and I told the people there, the counselors, that this woman wanted to talk to people, needed to talk to people, and she told them she wanted to talk to me. And so they trained me to talk to this woman. And I had been working with a lot of people, refugees from Katrina at the time, and they all wanted to talk to me. And I went maybe about 3.5 months talking to people about maybe the worst day of their lives, man. And that just beat me up so bad, man. And it was getting towards the end of my hitch, what they call your hitch in the military, your time in the military. And thankfully, man, I had a bunch of days saved up because I had worked so long. With the whole Katrina thing, I think I worked about 6 months with no off days. And so I had saved up. You gained about 2 days, I think, every pay period or every month. And there's 2 pay periods in a month. And so I'd gained a bunch of days. So I took the days that I had left and I went home. So I was able to go home then that time. I had to show up for checkups and those kind of things. And they would check in on me. But for the most part, I was done. And then I out processed after that period. So when I got out, one of the things that I had started doing when I was in is I was talking about creating a comic book. And I created a magazine with a friend of mine that had comic books and a lot of hip hop things. I was a big hip hop head when I was a kid. And so we created this magazine and I wanted to create a comic book. And so I had started work on a comic book with a friend of mine, Tony Shasteen, who is a comic book artist now. And we created this book. And I brought in a friend of mine. I'd met Rosario Dawson, who is an actress, and I met her through her uncle, Gustavo Vasquez, who was a comic book artist. He and I became friends. And I had gone to New York a couple of times I had gone to New York a couple of times to meet some artists in the network. And I stayed with Gus, and she came over to visit him once when I was there, and I kind of bumped into her. And we hung out a couple of times when I was in New York, and we had a rapport. And so I talked to him and I said, I want to make the character in the story look like her. At the time, there had been some movies that had come out. They were talking about the Batman films, the Chris Nolan Batman films, and the first one, Batman Begins, and how Christian Bale looks so much like Bruce Wayne. And I told him, I said, well, if we do this, if this thing gets picked up, then Rosario could play the main character if I make it look like her. And he thought this was a good idea, but he wanted to get her, I guess, her opinion and to get her to weigh in on this because someone else had done something like that without her permission. And she was really angry. And so I got to talk with her about it, and I told her what I wanted to do. And all I wanted was for her to say, yeah, sure, use my likeness. And she comes back and tells me, she goes, hey, can I be involved in this? And that was kind of a shock for me because I didn't have a plan necessarily for her to be involved in my comic book project with Tony, And so we brought her in, and she kind of co-wrote it with me. I would run ideas and things by her, and I created this book. And so, we launched the comic. Thank you. The comic did really, really well. The Weinsteins optioned the comic. They were interested in making it. And that was a thing where when they optioned it, she was already in LA. I had to fly to LA to meet with the Weinsteins there, and Tony Shasteen flew there as well. And that was probably my first real taste of Los Angeles. I came to the city, I met with the Weinsteins, I sat down and I talked about my project. And I think, interestingly enough, because I ended up going there later, I got to see Fox Studios. And I got to see Fox for the first time. We just drove by it, but it is it's got a very unique, the structure is very unique, and it's got some very unique architecture. I remember taking a picture of it now that I think about it when I drove by. But
it's my favorite studio to drive by.
Really? Yeah, it is pretty cool. I mean, I like Warner Brothers once I'm on the lot, but from the outside looking in, Fox and Paramount are my favorites. I like Paramount too. And so, I did that. we sold this thing. It was doing pretty well. I worked on a couple of projects after that. I actually worked on the Obama campaign. I did some things, with him.
Wow.
And yeah, and I got some other. I did some other comic projects. I did a Method Man project that was kind of popular. Method Man, sorry, the rapper from the Wu-Tang Clan. Something related to him. I did some other stuff, and Snoop Dogg actually hired me to do. I should say a rapper. I shouldn't say who it is. A rapper hired me. A very popular rapper at the time hired me to do a comic book project related to an album at the time that he was releasing, and the album didn't necessarily do well. And so they had to pay me. I was supposed to move to LA and work on this thing, which I did. And I get here, and maybe a couple of weeks after being here, they tell me they're going to have to kill the project. And they threw me a kill fee. And that kill fee probably would cover me for about 3 months in rent and food.
Oh, yeah.
And I really, really needed a job at the time. I had a manager from the comic book projects that I had done. And he started in film actually. And he worked in film and he worked in comic books. So he kind of was a bridge individual. And I talked to him and he knew that I was there. And I told him, I said, hey, man, I'm going to have to find work or something. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it just so happened at the time, there was a junior executive that was leaving 20th Century Fox. And he told me, hey, would you like to apply for this position? And for me at the time, honestly, I was scared because I was like, I had no experience in film. I had experience from the military. So I knew things about working in offices. I had written some things. I had written some scripts and things, but I'd never worked in a studio. And so he told me, I should apply. He said, he told me as much as he could. I met the individual who had the job before. I eventually got the job. And he told me a bit about it. They really just gave me information so I could go in. And I just went in. I had my military bearing about myself, stiff back and all those things. I knew how to present myself in the military. And while I didn't know as much about film as probably some other candidates, I did know about working in an office. I had for them a lot of very specific information that individuals wouldn't have because comic book movies are a big deal now. And this is 2010. So they were starting to grow and they knew there was interest in that. And me having been a comic book writer in the past, they knew that I had, I actually had, real knowledge of those things from actually doing them. And I had scripts so they could read things that I wrote and they knew that I could write to a degree. And the story department's primary job is reading scripts for the studio and making suggestions of whether they should buy the script, how they should pay attention to the script and those kind of things. And so I got hired into the story department to work. And that just happened to work out well because around the time when I got hired, and it may have had something to do with it, I don't necessarily know, but there was going to be a resurgence of the X-Men with X-Men First Class. That was their project. And so I got brought in around that time. I got to work with those individuals and see those individuals, and I started at Fox.
So I just have to ask, you are a junior executive at a huge Goliath studio, and in your position, you have the desks of every office on the studio lot bombarding you with requests for coverage and different stuff like that. How did you handle and manage? Did you do meditation retreats, or how did you handle all these aggressive executive assistants and their bosses just coming at you full speed every time?
Well, for me, and that was a place where the military actually helped me, honestly, because in the military, you deal with a lot of type A personalities. You deal with a lot of rough and tumble individuals. So for me, a lot of the posturing and things that I would see in the studio, I could kind of roll off my back more because I realized if I hadn't done something and you were acting away, that was more about you than it was about me. The other thing that I really tried to do is I was a big relationship builder, which is another thing I got from the military. So when, different times, especially when I first started, I would talk to, there were two other people in the office with me. There was Ted, who was the VP over the story department, and another guy who was his second in command. And I would talk to them and I would take different times and I would go off and I would go to the different offices that worked with us and I would go and introduce myself. So I would go talk to individuals. I would find out things that they were interested in. I would find out the kind of material that they like to see. And because I had an ear and I knew those things, that gave me something that I could give them beyond the thing they were looking for. Like I knew that they wanted coverage. I knew they were going to be submitting projects for coverage and asking me for coverage from other executives sometimes. But by me having them knowing me as an individual and knowing that I had certain insights and information, they knew that if they wanted those insights and information from me, be it about comic films, be it about films, be it about what I was able to see from my position in the office, any of those kind of things, they knew that they would have to treat me with a modicum of respect. So I wouldn't say, people were scared of me or anything like that, but, it got to a place where I could make sure that people weren't shouting at me or yelling at me when they were calling in and things like that. And also, I tried to do the job to the best of my ability. So if I knew you needed coverage, I would tell somebody, hey, if you need coverage, you just need to let me know. I don't need you, screaming at me that you need something or threatening me wasn't necessarily going to make me give you the information faster that you wanted. Talking to me like a person would. And once I was able to kind of, talk to them and impart this to them, that really helped things along. And also, I biked to work. Fox from where I lived was maybe about 7 miles away. Actually, maybe between 5 and 7 miles, somewhere around there. We'll just say 6. And it wasn't necessarily far. And I got a locker. So they have lockers in most of the studios. They have lockers that are actually meant for people who work on sets. And I got them to give me a locker in there. And I would put shower things in there. And I would just, I'd iron my clothes. I'd throw them in a book bag. And I would wear just, shorts and a T-shirt. And I would bike to the studio. And I would bike in. And biking allowed me to really kind of process my thoughts and order my thoughts before I got to work. And when I got off of work, it gave me a cool down period before I got home so that a lot of the dramas and things that I have weren't things that I would bring to my home life. So I did that, and I biked most of the time when it was warm, and thankfully LA is warm a lot.
So do you attribute you being able to handle speccing out a scripted pilot at nighttime and on weekends to your bike riding to work because it was meditative in a way?
I would say meditatively it helped. I'm an individual that running, I like to jog. Actually, I ran the LA Marathon the first year I was at Fox. But for me, those things when I'm running long distance are times when I think, because your blood really flows through your brain when you're running. And so for me, it's almost like a boost in cognition. And I'm a little more creative when I run. And so a lot of when I'm doing something physical like that. So a lot of the ideas that I would use for my scripts are things that I would come up with while I was running or while I was biking home. So I would go so far as if I knew that I was biking that night, I would get off at 7. So about 7:15, I was probably ready to leave. And I would sit there maybe another 5 or 10 minutes and read the script pages that I had. And that would then allow me to have those things fresh on my mind. And I could think about them on the ride home. In certain areas, I would make sure I watched it because I didn't want to get hit by a car or anything. But
the irony of your graphic novel with Rosario and your scripted pilot, to me, is that it's called Occult Task Crime Force. Yet, after spending time with you, you're one of the most insightful, non-conspiracy people I've ever met who has just a grounded, smart, intelligent understanding of a lot more than I do, frankly. And I just wanted to know, I want to say I remember at one point you telling me the whole occult facet of it was metaphorical for something. Will you just explain that real quick so that we know what, in your heart made you want to write about the occult or what?
Well, for me, I think a big thing for me, and this is going to sound silly, but being an African American, one of the things that I thought about is I think a lot about, well, not a lot, but in writing, I think about, what things are necessary. Like, when I look at one of the things, like, when you look at the X-Men, honestly, a lot of times mutancy and these people changing and being something else, but they're still essentially humans, is a metaphor for race. It's like how we can look differently at an individual who is at their core just like us. And that's something that since I was young, I thought about. And so one of the things with the OCT, when I was initially thinking about it, I was thinking about, man, like, monsters, if you have monsters in mythology, when you think of, you think of trolls and you think of all of these things, they're essentially relatively intelligent. They're like people, but we attribute things to them. We think they're dirty, or we think they're thieves. We have all these things that we've heard in stories, and we think about them. And it dawned on me that was really no different from, it's a lot like how racism is. Like, when people are racist, a lot of times in any direction, it's mostly because they are going on stories that they've heard about individuals that they've never exactly experienced themselves. And so when I started thinking about the OCT, I thought about, as a metaphor, I thought, man, if there were monsters in the city, how would they be treated? And I thought about, how these individuals would be treated, what it would be like for them. And I realized that experience was a lot like the experience of people who would feel like they've been discriminated against. And so for me, it was like, I wanted a story where I could talk about discrimination and no individual could feel as if I was picking, or as if I was pointing and directing my discussion about discrimination against one specific group. And I knew that with monsters aren't black, they're not white, they're not any other group, they're monsters. And that was something that, honestly, everybody would discriminate against. You know what I mean? No, everybody thinks zombies and vampires and all these things are bad, And so all of us as people, we would be the ones that would have these prejudices towards these other individuals. And that was a big thing for me in the start. I mean, Occult Crimes Task Force just sounded cool to me, honestly.
It's a cool, very cool name.
It encompassed the title. Thank you. And it was, for me, a lot of this was also dealing with, police officers. And we know how, police officers and things go with them, in the world. And so I wanted to talk about, how would the police officers deal with these things? Would they treat these characters and these individuals they encountered based on the stories, more or less the stereotypes that they had heard, or would they look beyond that? And so those were big things for me in the story. I mean, obviously, when I got into it, I wanted to get really detailed and come up with all this cool stuff, but that was the basis for me in the story. And I really liked it. I like doing that stuff.
And tell me what it was like having, let's just talk about Rat Pack real quick, because that's a super fascinating story. So you spend your nights and weekends just grinding and churning out a scripted pilot based on this graphic novel. And then next thing you know, you find yourself in meetings all over town with Brett Ratner's company. I mean, how cool is that? And tell us how that all came about.
I started working with Rat Pack maybe 3 or 4 months after I left Fox. One of the things at the studio is you have a non-compete when you're at the studio. So if you have a project and you want to sell that project, ultimately you would have to give Fox a chance to buy that project before you would go. And I talked to Rosario. We had been talking about doing something with the OCT, and I wanted to write the pilot, and I knew that was something that I couldn't do while I was at the studio. And ultimately, I knew if I wanted to move forward in my career as a writer, and if I wanted to use the lessons I had learned from the studio, I was going to have to leave Fox in order to do that. So I left the studio, and I began writing. We're talking like the really initial stuff in the pilot, a lot of that stuff. And Rosario introduced me to an individual that worked for Rat Pack, a guy who was an executive there. He was interested in perhaps working on something that she was interested in the future. He had approached her with some projects, and they weren't necessarily things that she wanted to do. And she is a fan of the graphic novel. She was a fan of that concept. So that was something, the challenge for me was, and I don't know necessarily if it was something they wanted it, initially, but it was something where they said, well, do you have a script? And honestly, I didn't want to tell them that I didn't. And so I said, I have something I had to clean up. And I did. I had a couple of lines I had to clean up. And they said, well, you have the summer. So at that point, I had from June until August to finish this up. And I had to write the entire thing, and I had to have it pretty clean, spit polished clean, to show them over that time. And so I knew that I was doing that, and I knew that I had an opportunity here with Brett Ratner's company to do something like that. But I also knew that to have that, I was going to have to knock it out the park, So I'd left Fox at that point. I talked to a couple of people about some things, an animation project potentially, and I kind of put those things to the side, and I focused on the script, which I kind of knew how to do from the studio, because working at the studio, I had seen other individuals work on projects, they had turned the scripts into me. I had read those scripts and analyzed them for the studio. So I kind of put myself on the other side of that. I put myself on the side of the writer, and I set one of my friends up as more or less like a story editor for me. And I just rock and rolled on that project, man. And I just busted my ass as hard as I could. And I got that script done in time to show Rat Pack, which I can tell you, man, the last day that I actually had to go in and sit with them, I almost slept in the meeting. Like I slept on the way back just because I was so tired. And we got the meeting. They really liked the script. They had their own story editors there who read it, and they enjoyed the script as well. Brett met me. He told me he didn't think I was crazy, which was a big thing for him. He was like, hey, this guy's not crazy. He was happy about that. And at the time, Rat Pack was a very big company, and they just decided we're going to take it wide. So they decided we're going to take it wide, and after that, because of who Brett Ratner was at the time and because of who Rosario was, the meetings that we had were with literally studio heads. You know, we were going in and we were talking to, you know, like the head of CBS at the time, things like that. We were talking to really high up individuals, presidents and things like that about the project. And so that's how it went. And it was a big deal for me. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. And I think the moral of that story, or not the moral, but one takeaway for me is it's all about who you're entering the room with. You would not have been, you wouldn't have had pitch meetings with the heads of the networks had it not been for Brett Ratner escorting you and your project into those rooms. And I think the takeaway I'm trying to get at is if you were just pitching with like an agent, you might have only pitched the vice president of development at those networks, right? Is that basically it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, a lot of times I would say yes, but I would say the other big thing to your point with somebody like a Brett Ratner that I learned was that Brett's an individual like everybody else. You know, he's got a brand to protect. He has a reputation to protect. And when those people go in, they want something that is indicative of who they are. And it's representative of who people think they are. So another big thing that I got with the project, I was just trying to do my best and knock it out of the ballpark. But I would say that when people are doing projects, they have to think about the end. Everyone thinks about the audience. The audience ultimately is who you want the script for. But you have to think about the individual that is going to be taking the project out with you and what that script says about them. You know what I mean? And you want to make something that they can look at and kind of feel a little bit of pride. Like you want them to feel proud that they found you. You want them to feel pride that they're showing you off to people and that they're introducing you to individuals to make your material. You know what I mean? So, you know, I kind of lucked into that because I wanted to I'm one of those people, like, you know, I'm going to try to always knock that thing out the park. But I realize that is important because Brett, when he goes in, even if he didn't write it, he's like, yeah, I found him. This is my guy. You know, this is the team I found. This is the thing I want to put my name on. And even honestly, to a degree, that's how Rosario feels. I had to do something that when she saw it, she felt was representative of her, for her to introduce me to those people. And then when they saw it, they had to feel it was representative of them for them to then introduce me to the presidents. And I don't think that people think about that a lot. I think they think about the end result, which is the audience. And that is very much important. But if you don't get past the gatekeepers, you're never going to get material to the audience to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I have to say the fact that you've carved out this place for yourself within the industry to where as soon as you do have that next scripted pilot or whatever you happen to be writing ready, people are actively knocking on your door to read it and to pass it on to their friends in the industry. And it's almost as like make all those introductions on your behalf, for your behalf. So I would ask you, what would you tell college kids? What is your, after everything you've done, how would you even shorten the gap of what you've achieved for yourself even more? If you could do it all over again.
If I could do it all over again, how would I would say, you know, for me, a big part of my life in my youth, especially in my 20s, was learning what I wanted to do. You know, it was going from college to the military, you know, finishing up college stuff after that, and then creating a magazine, and then creating a comic book, and then ultimately coming out to Hollywood. And what I would say for young people is if you know what you want to do, I think a lot of times, somebody told me this when I was really young, not in relation to film, but I think it works a lot for film. Somebody told me the world's only going to treat you as seriously as you treat yourself. And I don't think that means that someone needs to be over seriously all the time, but I think it means that you need to treat yourself and what you do with a level of professionalism. If you say you're going to do a script and you say that you want to get something done, then you need to organize your time and to get those things done in the time that you want to do them. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, when you meet these people, in the same way you said you never know who you're meeting, they never know who they're meeting. And since they don't ever know who they're meeting, if you treat yourself with a level of professionalism, respect, they realize that they should as well. They're just going to do that because that's what they're seeing. They're going, man, I just met Adam, and that guy seems like he's really on top of it. Then they're going to treat you with a level of seriousness because they see that you're a person who treats yourself with that. And that's one of the things that I would do. The other thing I would say is, if you know what you want to do, especially when you're young and you have the time to make mistakes and to do those things, I would go for the gold. I wish sometimes, I think in my own life, I wish I had known at 22. I wish I had known when I went to the military that I wanted to be in film, and I would have went to a film school.
I would say, just observationally, one thing you've done, and this is effortlessly, is that all of your friends happen to also be really doing well in the industry. Like, one of them is the co-EP of a CW show. Another one is a really talented graphic artist for graphic novels. Another one of your friends is a really higher echelon reality TV producer. Another one of your friends sold a movie to Lionsgate. So it's like you positioned yourself amongst all these people, all these peers in Los Angeles that are also doing really incredible stuff. And I would think that that's part of the secret as well.
Well, one of the things I was told when I was young, I don't even remember who told me this anymore. Somebody told me once, they said, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And I realized that, for one, I think a lot of people look at that and they go, well, all my friends need to be big. But the thing that I always think about is that with a friendship, if I meet an individual, I know what I want from them. I know what I want out of a friendship. And then it's a matter of me seeing if that person fits into my ideals for what I would like in a friendship. But I also think about, what do these people want? What do these people want in a friendship? What do they want from individuals? And then I look at myself and I go, okay, David, well, then what do you have to give? And a big part of me and what I've done is I've always tried to think, well, what is it that I have to offer people? What are things that I have, what are things that I have to offer as a friend? And those are things like, loyalty is a big thing, and then there are things like you're saying. I have friends that work in specific fields, and having skill sets and things that can help them, that attracts them to me like it attracts me to individuals. You know what I mean? Like, we all have people, they have things, but I think you have to think for yourself, what are the things that you are offering in a friendship as much as you are thinking about what you're getting out of it. Everybody knows what they want to get from Hollywood when they come here. That's why we all come here. But we don't think, what does Hollywood get from us? What makes your offer to Hollywood unique enough that Hollywood goes, I'm pushing all these people aside and I'm grabbing you? You know what I mean? And that's what I try to think about. I try to think about, well, what is the unique thing that I can offer my friends and I can offer business associates that they got to come to David for? Or
that's so smart.
The pool of individuals that they get them from is very, very small.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because even if that pool of individuals is 5 people, man, there's enough TV shows going on. After those 5 people are done, they're going to come to me. So I try to think about, what are these things that I'm offering people? What insights do I have? What things from the world that I've kind of got going on, and that helps me.
I have just a few more questions. You have a group of friends that you do a Sunday brunch with.
Yes.
And you don't have to say who they are, but give me a little insight as to how that sort of helps all of you collectively as being a support group for each other, and maybe the broad strokes of what you typically talk about, just so that college folk have an idea of what industry folk discuss.
Well, it's like you said, it's a bunch of individuals who all work in the business. mostly writers, producers, and directors, a couple executives as well. And the thing for us, it's that, having a group like that of individuals beyond even, being able to come to somebody and go, hey, I need a job. It's really great just to have people who also work in the same business. You can kind of compare notes. You can find out what is necessary, what's a big thing, what is important to people in the time. And also it's a good venting post because when you want to vent about something, I think sometimes it helps when the people that you are venting to understand on an intrinsic level the thing that you're venting about. There's an intimacy there because they've been in similar situations to you. So that's a brunch that we have. Obviously, with the virus going on, we haven't been able to have that brunch right now, but that is something people still actually get together on Zoom and they have the brunch on Zoom. But the thing is having the brunch and everybody kind of coming together and getting to share those experiences and also share information between each other. What TV shows somebody thinks are hot, but then also why they think that thing is interesting. If there's a show you really like, it allows you to sit down and do creative analysis with individuals because you can go, man, I really like this. What is it about this thing that resonates with me? And somebody else may go, man, it's just this thing. And so we find things like that. One of the big ones for me, Netflix has this show called Queen Sono, which is actually their first production on the African continent, and it's about a woman who's a spy. So it's good because it's done with Netflix level, Netflix quality, cinematography and special effects, but it's a really cool thing. And the way I found that is because one of the guys in our group is an American director, and he finds the show fascinating. So, when he tells me that and he's saying what he's looking for, it's funny because he worked on, I don't want to say that it's a large film. It's a film people would really be excited about. And it's a woman who is a spy. And I mean, that's going to give away some things. It's a woman and she's a spy. And he found this interesting because someone was doing a similar thing, but on a far smaller budget. You know what I mean? So he allowed me to understand comparison. It helped me to understand, well, why would you compare this to this other thing? Well, what are they doing to make their show quality since they don't have the money of the bigger production, things like that. And so the brunch, I would say, really does that because you're thinking for yourself what you bring to the table and what you add to the group, but then you're also pulling some things from the group that are also really nice and enrich you as well. So it's pretty cool. And then the food is dope, brunch is dope. So that's fun as well.
Do you have any advice for kids who are in working class families, know they have an interest for film, but they just don't know where to start?
Yeah, actually I do, man. I would say the biggest thing that a kid can do and can really help themselves out is a child is in a position that you're really going to get in your adult life where they can teach themselves things. They can teach themselves, like you can learn about film. You can watch a bunch of films. You can read about a bunch of films. I think the biggest thing that you can do, because at the end of the day, a lot of what we do as people is replication. We are replicating things that we saw. And so I think when you're young, a lot of times we're just picking films that we think are cool. And I'm not telling you to stop watching those. But I think you should also look at other films. You should look at films that maybe were cool to kids 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You know what I mean? You've got, especially for kids nowadays, dude, they've got Hulu and they've got Netflix. They've got the new HBO Max thing. They've got all of these different places where they can go and watch films. And I would say the biggest thing for a kid is to be a student of film. And I would say one of the first things you should do, almost like a film class, is you should start watching as many different kinds of films that are age appropriate for you as you can so that you can learn more about the craft that you want to get into. And I think once you've started watching those films and things for over the years, you can go to a place like the Writer's Store online and you can start looking for materials that you can buy yourself, books to teach you more about film. And the great thing about that is by the time you get to college age, where you can then take classes, you will have informed yourself before you get to the class about film. So you're not coming in as somebody who doesn't know anything. It's almost like you are building a big rock. It's like you're building a big piece of metal here that you're going to then shape into a sword. You know what I mean? But you got to build that thing first. You got to build the thing that gets shaped into the sword. And while you're a kid, That's when you can read the scripts. You can find them online really easy, and you can look and you can see a lot of movies. You can find movies that win the Oscars every year. You can look back and go, well, what year was I born? You know, what won the Oscar the year that I was born? You can watch that film, and you can find real film analysis online and kind of check that out. And that is something that in youth, before you're old enough to necessarily sell a script or something, you can really spend time doing that. And I think that's going to make your work better when you get older.
Great. And I guess my last question is, I was in college at the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, about 50 miles north of Dallas. And I thought I wanted to be a screenwriter really badly. And I applied for the class, and we had to send him, the instructor, a sample page or two of something that we wrote in Final Draft, which is a big screenwriting software. And I wrote a few pages that were inspired by a Wes Anderson film. Back then it was The Royal Tenenbaums that, really spoke to me. And I remember him saying, this is the worst dialogue I've ever seen, because I asked him why I didn't make the cut, why I didn't get into the class. And he told me it's the worst thing he'd ever seen. And I was so confused because, in my head, I was like, well, I asked him, I go, did you see Royal Tenenbaums? As if it's the best thing ever to hit the screen. And he was just sort of like, no, I haven't, as if he had no interest in seeing it. And I think that it's a silly story, but it also sort of made me disassociate from my interest in becoming a screenwriter because I felt rejected. And, that's on me, of course, but I'm just wondering, what are your favorite screenwriting books? Like, let's just say there's a college kid that goes through that. He gets rejected from the screenwriting class. What can he read to learn the craft without taking a college class?
I would say right now it's hard for me to think like books by name, but I would say people that I look at, Robert McKee. Everybody knows Robert McKee, but they know him for a reason. He's really good. Sid Mead, he's really good. He's somebody else you can look up. Blake Snyder, he's really good. Robert Tobin is another great screenwriter. I would say his books as well. And what I'll do when we get off of this, man, I will send you a list of books. But I would just say, as far as people that I know, they're authors and they are individuals, for the most part, who are still writing things now. And those are people that if I were to see a new book by Tobin, I'd pick it up without question, If I were to see a certain book by some of these individuals, the ones that are still living, I would pick those books up. And like I said, I will send you over some links to books online that I read, but I think a lot of times I would say Robert McKee starting off works well because his book is a broad, really good broad book, and for me now specifically, I'm looking for books about very specific things, books about dialogue, things about story progression, very small things. But in the broad sense, McKee is pretty amazing. And I would say that's good for kids.
Well, thank you for joining today. And this was a very awesome, fun podcast. And I think your wisdom will help college kids shorten the gap of time it'll take them to start kicking ass and doing good things out here. And that's the whole point of this. So thanks again.
Oh, man. Well, thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate it. And I love having the opportunity to talk to people when they get in the film, man, because I totally understand that love. Thank you.